Number 5 on this list is Cadaver Synod. This is one of the weirdest events in history, guys. Daily Gister says, in 897 the Vatican saw one of the most bizarre episodes in history. The corpse of a pope was put on trial by his living successor. Pope Formosus, dead for a few months, was hardly qualified to defend himself in a court of law. Nonetheless, Pope Stephen VI had the body disinterred, dressed in robes, and propped up on the papal throne to stand trial. He even appointed a deacon to speak on the corpse's behalf. While Stephen VI hurled accusations at Formosus, the accused remained stoically silent, as might be expected of a corpse. The dead pope was found guilty of usurping the papacy. Stephen VI declared all of his acts as pope null and void. All consecrations, all appointments, all ordinations were undone. So, as you guys can imagine, the church doesn't really talk about this episode too much because it's kind of embarrassing, honestly. Clearly, the current pope during this time was not fit to be in charge at all and might have even been losing his mind a little bit. This is pretty dumb, but at least it makes for a good story to tell at a dinner party or something, so there, stuff that one in your back pocket and save it for later, guys. Number 4 on this list is Sixtus VI. Sixtus VI was a pope who was in power back in the late 1400s. He definitely made some questionable life choices though, some of which I'm sure the church would love to forget. Business Insider writes, Sixtus VI, elected in 1471, apparently had 6 illegitimate children, including one with his sister. That didn't stop him from policing the sexual appetites of the underlings though. He created a church tax on and charged priests for having mistresses. Sixtus VI also had a taste for nepotism, as did many other popes. He made 6 of his nephews cardinals. My dude literally had a kid with his sister. I'm an only child, so I don't really know what it's like to have a sibling, but even I'm grossed out about hearing that. Obviously, it's a pretty bad look for the church when their literal leader is shacking up with his sis. Something that I don't think God or the Bible is gonna look too kindly upon.
Yeah. Number 3, Samael. Samael is one of the more interesting entries on this list, namely because depending on the text cited, he's either an archangel of heaven or a fallen angel serving in hell. Angels to some, demons to others and all that. He's often referred to as the original Grim Reaper, and is thought to be where depictions of the Soul Collector stem from. Samael across most texts is known as the Angel of Death, a title that precedes itself. I mean, you hear the Angel of Death and you know I probably should not be messing with that guy, because I'm pretty sure they also call John Wick that sometimes. It's said that on the hour of a person's final release from this mortal coil, Samael will descend upon them, wings extended and sword drawn, dripping at its tip the poison that takes your life. Samael's name actually translates to Venom of God, again, in case you're wondering just how nice this guy is. Samael is known as the Accuser, the Seducer, the Destroyer, and a Midnight Joker. Samael's role as the Seducer is an essential one to the Kingdom of Heaven. He's seen as good and evil in the same measure, but he is only serving God's will. Tempting mankind is Samael's lot in life. It's been said as well that Samael is the one who planted the tree of knowledge and was the serpent who tempted Adam and Eve to bite the fruit. When Abraham was tested by God to sacrifice Isaac, it was said that Samael was the one who whispered into their ears to disobey. It's said that his ultimate goal is to bring an end to death itself, including the very concept of it. Once he's finished his ultimate mission, he'll be annihilated himself, and with death undone, his mission complete. Number 2, Mephistopheles. Imagine you could make a deal for whatever you wanted, no matter how outrageous the request. Power, influence, romance. If all it took was your soul, would you do it? Well, that's the offer Mephistopheles is prepared to make you. One of the most sinister servants in hell. Mephistopheles, or Mephisto as he's sometimes referred to, is one of Lucifer's right-hand men. Responsible for bargains and deals involving human souls, Mephistopheles takes a great sickening pleasure in luring wayward souls downwards to the underworld. If Mephistopheles has already made himself present to you, I'm afraid it's already too late to you. He doesn't go out of his way to corrupt and tempt the innocent the way other demons do, but rather he finishes the job for those who've already begun to falter on a path they can't return from. In some instances, Mephistopheles' role changes slightly. Sometimes he appears to trick people into damning themselves. In others, they're already damned and he's just finishing off the inevitable. Most famously is the legend he originates from, where the bet he places with Faust for his soul, the protagonist of the ancient German legend, who made a deal at a crossroads with Mephistopheles. In exchange for ultimate power and the servitude of Mephistopheles while Faust lives, when he passes, Faust's soul will become the property of Mephistopheles and he will enslave him and damn him for eternity. Faust got what he was promised, and the terms Faust and Faustian now became synonymous with hard bargains out of this legend. Mephistopheles knows that he's essential to the cycle of the world. He knows that as much as we hate him, we need him. He tells Faust that he's part of the dark chaos that gives birth to the light. Sure, he's offering people in exchange for eternal damnation for mortal goods, but he is inspiring people in his own twisted little way. He's trying to get you to do better so you won't hear him knocking. Number 1. Leviathan. As far as demons go, who's a bigger threat than the Leviathan? I mean, how could there even be a bigger threat? Leviathan, it's in the name. Just let that sit in your mouth for a bit and think of something big. Leviathan is thought to be the embodiment of the sin of envy, and he is one of the princes of hell and the grand admiral of hell's armies. It's tasked with pushing man towards temptation and the sin of heresy. Leviathan manifests itself as a behemoth of a creature, an incomprehensibly large sea serpent that would make H.P. Lovecraft blush. It's said to have impenetrable armored scales all over its body, and has monstrous claws as well, capable of destroying anything it would ever have to battle against, should that ever arise. It's said that it can conjure up mighty bursts of flame from its chest like a dragon. Leviathan serves as the gatekeeper of hell, with the mighty demon's very jaws serving as the gates to the underworld themselves. Said as well that Leviathan's own flesh makes up the foundations for the walls of hell, and it feasts upon souls that attempt to escape the underworld. Foolishly, of course. As far as demonic power levels go, making up the literal corners of the underworld have got to count for something. How many demons can claim to be so hardcore they practically are hell? I can see why he's such a trusted lieutenant. Number 5. Mammon. There's nothing wrong with wanting a little, right? It's nice to want. Nothing better than having a little money and power. For most of us who weren't born into a Fortune 500 lineage, it might be a little bit tricky, unless you got a little bit help. Maybe like from Mammon, the embodiment of human greed. You know, he's actually a lot more generous than his position as greed demon might suggest. You know, you don't have to do too much. If you just give over your eternal soul and pledge yourself to an eternity in his service, he might reward you with great riches. That's a pretty solid transaction. Mammoth is thought to originate from an ancient word for wealth, and it's thought that this is where Mammon was first born from. He was mankind's inherent desire for wealth and greed, twisted out of subconscious want. The Gospel of Luke and Matthew both directly quote this, saying, "You cannot serve both God and Mammon," meaning you can't have a pious life and also find yourself on a quest for massive wealth, and later taken literally to mean you can't serve one of the 7 princes of hell if you worship God. Mammon is greedy. Makes sense? He's real greedy. It's said that of all the archdukes and princes of hell, Mammon is more concerned with staring at the gold pavement than any of Lucifer's rebellion or business of the heavens, taken to mean that Mammon doesn't really concern himself with anything that doesn't involve cold, hard coin. He is on that grind set 24/7. The demon of greed has taken many forms over the years, with his most consistent depiction being that of a fairly normal-looking humanoid, looming over his subjects in a giant golden throne, looking down on those who would call for his aid. He's also associated with a wolf, and is believed to be able to take the form of one for his dealings on Earth. It's said that part of the arcane ritual to evoke Mammon's spirit is to imagine your spirit as a golden wolf calling out to him. If you do invoke Mammon, just be sure you're being reasonable with what you ask for. You never know what happens if you get too greedy. Abzu. It's said that when the rebellion began, Lucifer fell from heaven and was cast out alongside the other fallen angels. Well, who were the lesser known fallen angels? Abzu is an obscure demon, but a threatening one nonetheless, and a very difficult name to pronounce. In the Testament of Solomon, the demon Abzu introduces himself as a threat to God's will, and anyone who serves God. Abzu rules over some dominions of hell, serving as one of Lucifer's trusted lieutenants. He was originally an angel, but unhappy, and when cast out with the rest of them, fell to earth, disfigured and vengeful. As he fell out of the kingdom of heaven, the other angels desperately grabbed at his wings to try and retrieve him. But instead of restraining him, the process ripped his wing from his back, leaving Abzu with a singular, dark, monstrous red wing, although I doubt he minds much, because to be honest, that sounds sick as all hell. It probably works really well for his demon aesthetic. Abzu presides over the pits of Tartarus, a unique dimension in hell originating from Greek mythology as a depth of the underworld. Abzu is a powerful sorcerer, boasting to King Solomon that he's far superior to the prophet Moses in every way. He brags of his sorcery and magic, being able to shift ideas and human perception in his favor, conjuring miracles, wonders, and form signs to humans, and is even able to bestow his gift to humans in exchange for favor. Abzu takes a particular personal pleasure in torturing God's servants out of his twisted malice for the heavens above. Thankfully, Abzu's cruelty was his undoing. When Moses parted the Red Sea, Abzu wanted to be there to see it in person, or in demon, I guess. When the Red Sea closed yet again, Abzu was trapped inside a pillar of air, but Beelzebub is confident he will return again. Number 3, the Legion. Now, this next demon is a tiny bit of a cheat because although it's supposed to be a top 5 list, I'm about to make it a top 500,000 list. This next demon is known as the Legion, for it is many. The Legion's first documented recording is from the Gospel of Mark, where Jesus Christ encountered a man possessed by a demon. When he spoke to the man in an effort to exorcise him, he asked for the name of the demon inside him, and the man responded, Legion, for there were many devils inside him. Upon being exorcised from the man, the Legion asked if it could instead be transferred to a herd of pigs, which he then obliged. Now the Legion is pretty atypical when it comes to demons. It's not the prince of anything, it's not the manifestation of any one sin, and it's not any one thing at all. The Legion is made of countless demons that all function together in unison like a hive mind. When one has a thought, the rest of the Legion obeys. When one member of the Legion speaks, the rest of them speak all at once. Now sometimes the armies of Satan are referred to as the legions of hell, but I guess the Legion is a separate thing altogether. It must make filling out forms very difficult. No one's really sure what sort of demons the Legion are or what they look like even. It's just agreed that there's a lot of them all working together on their common goals. Like I said, no one really knows what they look like, but if you've ever seen a horde of, anything all in one place, you can't imagine that it would be anything pleasant. Now the Legion isn't as much of a pop culture starlet as some of the other demons I've mentioned on this list, but that doesn't mean that it's influenced things in pop culture. The phrase Legion, for we are many, appears in all sorts of different things, probably because it's just a very cool way to describe yourself. A recurring boss fight in the Castlevania video games called Legion appears as a writhing mass of bodies, no doubt inspired by the story. And the character in Mass Effect named Legion is an AI life form comprised of thousands of individual AI working in tandem, who directly references the story, introducing itself, saying, "We are Legion, for we are many." And while I'm on it, Legion was the entire best character in Mass Effect, but that's neither here nor there. Sleep easy, big guy. Number 2, Beelzebub. Now we're getting into the big hitters. Beelzebub is thought to be one of the first angels to have ever fallen to hell, alongside Leviathan and Lucifer himself. He and Lucifer actually have a bit of an identity crisis, as the two are sometimes thought to be interchangeable. They must have similar haircuts. Some demonologists argue that Beelzebub is another name for Lucifer, and some others pose that he's one of his most trusted lieutenants. But whatever Beelzebub is, everyone can agree that he's pretty horrifying. His history is fairly interesting. It's thought that his namesake is a mockery of the god Baal, an ancient Bronze Age god of fertility. Some scholars believe that Beelzebub's name comes from Baal-zebub, translating to Lord of the Flies, inferring that the followers of Baal are nothing more than flies worshipping a dung god. They didn't get the memo that Belphegor was the dung god. The Lord of the Flies sort of ended up becoming Beelzebub's title, with almost all depictions of the demon featuring flies in ubiquitous amounts around him. Occasionally he's even depicted as a giant fly. It's very Kafkaesque. Beelzebub is said to be one of the most powerful demons inside of Hell's domain, capable of great control over humanity, able to tempt them. Beelzebub was cited during the Salem witch trials as the entity that had corrupted and swayed so many women to witchery. Now there's some discrepancy as to what sin Beelzebub is thought to preside over, with some offerings saying that he represents pride, some others saying that he represents gluttony, which I would say probably seems a little more fitting for a fly demon anyway, and he's most commonly associated with gluttony. Number 1, Asmodeus. Yeah, it probably would have made a lot of sense to have Lucifer as the #1 spot on this list. I mean, he's the king of hell and all that. So let's just take this moment, give him an honorable mention, and say he's at the #0 spot, just because I thought it was a little obvious, and I'm pretty sure you know who Satan is, and there's other demons we could talk about, bring up some unknown ones. So filling in at the #1 spot is Asmodeus, one of the princes of hell, and the embodiment of the cardinal sin of lust. Asmodeus fell from heaven alongside the other fallen angels, reforming as a prince of hell. Asmodeus is said to have been married to Lilith, the primordial she-demon, famed for her banishing from the Garden of Eden and famed for destroying Fraser Crane. Lilith was cursed and banished for her defilement and depicted as a temptress, and Asmodeus saw all that and was like, hey girl, I'm into all that stuff. You want to procreate an endless stream of demons into the world and reign over a dominion of chaos? And the rest is wedded bliss. Depictions of Asmodeus vary pretty wildly from case to case. Occasionally, he's drawn as a handsome young fella, but most commonly he's depicted as a squat, vaguely humanoid creature with a rooster leg, the tail of a snake, 3 heads, comprising of a bull, a goat, and a scruffy demon head as the center. Asmodeus presides over lust with the help of his beloved Lilith, and the two tempt humans with madness and desire to ruin people with lechery. Somehow this wasn't enough for Asmodeus though, as some stories also describe Asmodeus as having command over the betting halls of hell and is responsible for tempting man's souls towards gambling. So what I am hearing from this is that Asmodeus probably parties harder than any demon out there.
#5 on this list is the farm demon. Most of the time we look at these photos and they're typically pretty old, captured 100 years ago and often chalked up as being a double exposure error or something like that. I don't think that can be said for the farm demon though. Stephen Wagner writes, this amazing photo was taken by photographer and graphic designer Neil Sandbach in 2008. Neil was photographing some scenic shots at a farm in England as part of a project for wedding stationery. The couple planned to have their wedding ceremony held there later. Neil was astonished when he examined the digital photo on his computer. There, as if peeking around a corner at him, is a ghostly white, almost glowing figure of what looks like a child. Neil says he's quite sure that there was no one there at the time. There's further corroboration that this is a true ghost photo. Neil had shown the couple the anomalous photo, and before the wedding they asked the staff at the farm if they'd ever seen any spooky experiences there before. They didn't mention Neil's photo. Indeed, they admitted that the figure of a young boy dressed in white night clothes had been seen on several occasions around the barn. So it looks as if this barn is haunted by some type of demon child, and Neil just happened to get lucky enough and capture it on camera. I think what's really scary about this though is that they had no idea it was there while they were staying at the farm, meaning that this demon child would have been stalking Neil the whole time. And what's even crazier than that is that this couple literally continued with the wedding. Like, scenery and all that quaint stuff is important, but a demon child running around the grounds? That's definitely a no-go wedding spot for me. #4 on this list is the demon pilot. In 1987, Mrs. Sayer and some of her closest friends were visiting Fleet Air Arms Station at Yeovilton, Somerset in England. As is customary with places that have a bunch of airplanes, you gotta take a photo of you inside of one as if you're flying it. Mrs. Sayer hopped into a helicopter that had been out of commission for a while, and she got her friends to take a snap of her while she was in it. The picture that came out was not what Mrs. Sayer or any of her pals expected though. When they took a look at the photo a while later, they saw what is a very clear image of a pilot sitting next to her. Actually, claiming that it's a pilot is a bit of a stretch. In truth, it's just a figure with a white shirt on that looks like a man. What this thing's connection to Mrs. Sayer or to the helicopter is anyone's guess. Apparently, when that photo was being taken, even though Mrs. Sayer had a bright smile on her face, she wasn't feeling so hot. In fact, she was feeling rather scared and anxious. She had no idea why at the time, and it was a passing feeling that went away after a few minutes, but just an overwhelming feeling of anxiety while she was there. To this day, nobody knows what this apparition is, what it's doing there, or what could have caused it to appear.
#3, Popobawa. Now that name might sound deceiving, cause to be honest it does sound just the littlest bit cute, but this thing is the farthest thing from adorable imaginable. This terrifying demon hails from the island of Zanzibar in East Africa. If you don't know Zanzibar, it's where Freddie Mercury came from. Look it up, you'll learn something today. Popobawa is Swahili for batwing, referring to the creature's most common form that it takes of a giant, vaguely humanoid bat creature. But the bat form is just one of its many appearances that it can take. A Popobawa can take on whatever it pleases, and is more of a shadow creature than anything else, preferring to dwell in the darkness in a sort of formless way. Now, a shadowy, shape-shifting bat creature would already be enough horrifying qualifiers to land this spirit in a top 5 list of scariest spirits around the globe, but it's this next little tidbit that really earns its spot on this list. The Popobawa specifically targets victims who don't believe in it. So, if you don't believe in Popobawas, you better start. You're in one. That's not really how that joke went. It's thought to be behind the cause of an outbreak of hysteria through Zanzibar in the late 90s, when there were several reports through village after village of men reporting that they had been attacked in the night by this demonic creature. It got so bad that eventually villagers would resort to sleeping outside their homes, out of a belief that the creature wouldn't attack someone outside their house. Maybe there's like, I don't know, demon etiquette laws, I don't know. It's said that the Popobawa is hunting you if you can smell an intense smell of sulfur around your home. Mostly it comes out at night. Mostly. The way it gets you is particularly unpleasant. Instead of just like eating you or slashing or doing something normal that a normal monster would do, the Popobawa crushes you during the night by sitting on you. Ha! People who claim they've been attacked say they wake up in the middle of the night with an intense pressure on their ribs and chest and have trouble breathing. It's been said that if you ever suspect you've caught the attention of the Popobawa, the best way to rid yourself of it is to spread knowledge and tell everyone everything you know, because after all, it goes after non-believers. Not that, that's why I'm telling you all this now. I've been sleeping really good. My chest is doing fine. Number 2, Vetis. I'd never heard of this demon before doing my little research for this video, and let me tell you, it's a regret of mine that I didn't know about it earlier, because my life has been improved since knowing about this thing. Vetis is a demon whose main goal and pleasure in life is to convert good, pious, righteous people into nasty sinners so they can get pulled down into hell. It's hard enough trying to live a life free of sin without demons also trying to trick me into damning my eternal soul. I already can't walk down the street without coveting 3 things in a window. Now I gotta deal with this? Luckily for me, Vetis probably wouldn't be terribly interested in me, since swaying me with sin is remarkably easy. He goes after priests, members of the cloth, people of devout faith. It's like his job to take charge of the really tough cases to tempt towards sin. He's a master of deception, seduction, trickery, bribery, intimidation, and a whole lot of other nasty demon business that probably looks good on his Tinder profile. Where he gets kind of wild though is that apparently he only ever talked in rhyme, which was supposed to help him lull you into a sense of comfort that causes you to trust him and makes you more likely to sin. I don't know about rhyme making me sin. That's feels like what they said would happen if I listened to rap music. Besides his freestyling bars, Vetis is a shape-shifting demon capable of taking whatever form he pleases, but he prefers to take forms that are wooden in nature, like a cursed tree or something for example. He's also depicted as often having many limbs, growing outwards and fractal like a spider might. Most insidiously about all that Vetis does is that he stares deeply into your soul and sees your deepest, darkest, most sinful desires, meaning he has definitely read my Frasier fanfiction. Vetis then, with his conjuring and shape-shifting, makes your desire manifest in reality, where he can tempt you with sin up close and personal to see just how truly committed to the path of the righteous you are. And finally, coming in number 1 at the list is Moloch. Perhaps you've heard the name before. Moloch is an old god, real old, like Old Testament old. Moloch takes the form of an impressively sized deity with the head of a cow or bull instead of man, and usually he has his arms stretched outwards towards a fire in most statues or paintings of him. This is because this was his preferred method of sacrifice. Whatever you were to offer him, usually human, were to be cast into the flames for Moloch's pleasure. He's thought to be a pagan fertility deity, mentioned across various religious texts and worshipped by the Canaanites. Moses forbade the Israelites to worship Moloch, as he was a false god. Moloch quite enjoyed sacrifices and being paid homage, and it's said that this was always to appease his wrath. In Paradise Lost, the epic poem that fleshed out much of what we know and think about hell, Moloch was described as being a fallen angel and one of Satan's greatest warriors. This depiction paints him as a bloodthirsty soldier of hell who is eager to spur a war against heaven's forces, and he is worshipped as a deity specifically to anger God above. Sounds like he makes lovely company.
Number 5 on this list is Lord Combermere, or maybe better put as the ghost of Lord Combermere. The picture that we're going to look at today depicts the ghostly silhouette of the late Lord Combermere sitting in his chair. Insider writes, amateur photographer Corbet allegedly set up her camera and took this hour-long exposure while the funeral of her brother-in-law, Lord Combermere, was taking place 4 miles from the home. Interestingly, the apparition that appears to be sitting in the deceased Lord Combermere's chair is suggested to be Lord Combermere himself. I think the scariest part about this photograph is the timing. The fact that this was apparently captured literally right when the funeral for this man was being held. It's very possible that his spirit could have still been in and around the area and wasn't quite ready to leave the world of the living yet. Ghost Story UK says, it's thought by some that during that time a servant might have come into the room and sat briefly in the chair, creating the transparent image. This idea was refuted by members of the household, all testifying that they were all attending Lord Combermere's funeral. Sir William Barrett, who investigated the case and reported on it in the Journal of the Society for Physical Research, was not satisfied. Working on the theory that a manservant may have come in and seated himself in the chair, he took a test photograph and got a picture that was almost a duplicate of the Combermere photograph. The matter seemed ended, but as he told in his book On the Threshold of the Unseen in 1918, sometime later he received a letter from Lord Combermere's daughter-in-law about the photograph. She said that the face was always too indistinct to be quite convincing to me, though some of his children had no doubt at all of the identity. I may add, none of the manservants in the house closely resembled the figure and were all young men who were all attending the funeral. No one resembled him and everyone was out of the house when this photo was taken. For years the church and others have tried to explain this photograph, but they just simply can't. Maybe it was the ghost of Lord Combermere, or maybe it was a demon playing a trick on all of us. We may never know. Number 4 on this list is Freddy Jackson. In this photo, we're going to be looking at Sir Victor Goddard's Royal Air Force Squadron. This picture was taken in 1919 after World War I and showed a bunch of young strapping pilots. What's wild about this though is the unexpected visitor that we have in the back row. If we zoom into the top row and look at the man fourth from the left, we can see something over his right shoulder. An apparition of sorts that resembles a human face. After people started taking note of this and examined it, those who had worked with the squadron identified that face as Freddy Jackson. Freddy Jackson was a mechanic with this squadron for a while, but the crazy part is that he had died in a propeller accident several days earlier. Similarly to Lord Combermere, the day that this picture was taken was the day of his funeral. Maybe his ghost showed up because he was pissed all his friends were taking pictures and not paying their respects. But seriously though, how on earth do you explain a photo like that with tons of other people in it? It's impossible for it to have been staged, and it's clear that there's something there. Hopefully Freddy was able to find peace after his impromptu photo bomb. Number 3 on this list is God's Banker. God's Banker was the nickname that they gave to a man named Roberto Calvi. Forbes writes, it was described as a scene straight out of an Alfred Hitchcock film. The man's corpse dangled from an orange nylon rope tied to scaffolding under London's Blackfriars Bridge. He was dressed in a grey suit with a white waistcoat and a blue striped shirt. He wore shoes and socks but no tie or belt. An expensive watch on his wrist was stopped at 1:52 a.m. and nearly 12 pounds worth of pieces of bricks were stuffed into his trousers. A young postal clerk had made the grim discovery on his way to work on the morning of June 18, 1982, and alerted the police. Officers who examined the body found a wallet containing around 13,000 in various currencies: Italian, Austrian shillings, American dollars, Swiss francs, and a passport bearing the name Gian Roberto Calvini. This man was found dead, but why and how does the church play into this? Well, the local writes, the chairman of Milan's Banco Ambrosiano, in which the Vatican was the main shareholder, had been found guilty of illegally exporting billions of lire. He shaved off his mustache and fled to London, where he was murdered. An American archbishop wanted for questioning was granted immunity by the Vatican, while 5 Italians were acquitted of the crime in 2007. Basically, this guy was in deep with some very bad people, and the Vatican were some of those people. Also pretty questionable just literally giving immunity to this archbishop because you can. It should also be noted that this banker was believed to be in deep with the mafia as well. The Vatican seems to have an interesting choice in friends. Number 2 on this list is World War II. I don't think it's unfair to say that World War II might have been the closest that we got to a fight where it truly was good versus evil. One side was fighting for freedom and the other side represented death and hatred. Thankfully for all of us, freedom won out in the end and the horrifying regime that was trying to take over collapsed. After World War II, some people had to pay for what they did. After all, it saw arguably the worst genocide in history and some horrible wartime atrocities. People were put on trial, and individuals who hadn't been supporting the freedom side were heavily scrutinized. The Vatican during this time was noticeably pretty silent though. Who did they support during this period of time, and why didn't they do anything? It's believed that Jewish people were actually rounded up outside of the Pope's window at one time or another, and the Pope would have been able to see firsthand what was actually going on behind closed doors. Why didn't he do anything to stop this? The actions, or lack thereof, of the Pope at the time, Pope Pius XII, have been under heavy fire for years. It's even been thrown around that this Pope collaborated with these deathly acts and was on board with them. Now, there isn't any proof of this, but the Vatican isn't necessarily opening their doors and having people come in to check their records either. They would love to keep whatever went on back then completely under wraps and just forget that it ever happened. Sounds to me like something potentially sketchy might have been going on with the church that they don't want us to know about. And finally, number 1 on this list is Pope John Paul I. This is one of the biggest scandals to rock the church and the Vatican, and something that they're more than happy to keep under wraps. The Week writes, "In The Godfather Part 3, a shady deal between the Mafia and the Vatican leads to the murder of the Pope. Was this based on a true story? Possibly. On the morning of September 28, 1978, Pope John Paul I was found dead sitting up in his bed after only 33 days in office. Although Vatican officials claimed the 65-year-old Pope died of a heart attack, there was never an autopsy, and at the time, the Vatican definitely had ties to organized crime. Sure enough, in 1982, Vatican Bank President Father Paul Marinkis resigned from his post after a series of scandals exposed the bank's ties to the Mafia. Eventually, the bank had to repay more than $200 million to its creditors. But Marinkis was never indicted of a crime, and though he was suspected of being involved in several mysterious deaths, including Pope John Paul I, Marinkis successfully claimed diplomatic immunity in the United States and retired to Arizona in 1990 and died there 16 years later. Until I started really digging into potential church secrets, I never had any idea that they had ties to the Mafia. This is because they've tried to cover it up as much as possible. Now, you might be thinking, in this example specifically, that the fact that they neglected to do an autopsy is evidence of something. Like the church knew that they would find something that they didn't want to be revealed. But the truth is, they never do an autopsy on the Pope. It's believed that performing an autopsy on the Pope will taint the body in some way, and that it will make it harder to get into heaven. The body must remain clean and untampered within its path to God. This is all fine and good, but it means that you get instances like this where this person potentially got murdered and no one will be able to prove it. It's also really hard to get anywhere with the higher ups of this organization because oftentimes they just claim diplomatic immunity. It's widely believed now that the Vatican was at one point deeply involved with the Mafia and might even still be. They have way more money than anyone thinks that they should have, and this money didn't just appear out of thin air. It's possible that their ties with the Mafia in this case even caused a murder.
Number 5, Pazuzu. Our first terrifying demon up on this list has made quite the career for himself in pop culture. He's picked up some small gigs here and there. He's serving as a sort of mascot of sorts for the real fake band Gorillaz, multiple cameos on Futurama, and won some acclaim for his star-studded role in The Exorcist, possessing Reagan and making us all afraid of pea soup. Although his real historical background is far more interesting than any of his pop culture appearances. Pazuzu has been around for a long time. First being recorded as a Babylonian demon wind god, who was always playing both sides, so he'd come out on top. He was a god of wind, and it was thought that the wind ravaging, storms, and locusts were all byproducts of Pazuzu's rage. But he was also thought to be a protector. He would protect the home, taking a particular liking to watching over pregnant women. He was an incredibly destructive force in nature, and when it would come time to throw down, Pazuzu would fly across the world, breaking the wings of other demons to prevent them from getting into any trouble. Sort of like a demonic Batman. His portrayal in The Exorcist is probably where most people know him from and assume those things about him, where he's seen as a much more plain Jane possessing demon, lacking his impressive wings and other traits, and not doing a whole lot of flying around or anything with the wind. focusing a lot more on projectile vomiting and harassing a couple of priests. The real Pazuzu is a lot cooler than his exorcist appearance, but no doubt more people know about that than they do an ancient Babylonian wind god. I don't think I'd like to spend much time with either incarnation face to face, and those priests definitely didn't want to either. Now ghouls, goblins, lend me your ears, and subscribe if you wouldn't mind. Number 4. Belphegor. Now another demon who's had his moment in pop culture. Maybe you recognize Belphegor from Supernatural's first fledgling season, all the way back when the boys were wide-eyed and hadn't even died once yet. Or maybe if you're a Persona fan, you recognize Belphegor as the perpetually bored demon on the can. It's a video game with a talking cat. And you play as a guy who's got a healthy sleep schedule and can manage his social circle well. It's not a game focused on realism. But it turns out, doing a little research, there was a reason for this foul demon's appearance. One of the 7 princes of hell, the demonic icon of sloth's favorite offering isn't blood or a fresh goat, but a little mud pie, feces if you want to get scientific with it. Look, I'm not going to judge, and I'm not going to ask what he's doing with it. Old lore just says that if you wanted to summon Belphegor, you had to bring him a lot of feces. There's no metric volume ever listed, just a lot. If you do summon him, he'll trade you wondrous riches, expand your ability to discover new things, expand your consciousness, but at the cost of the temptation of your mortal soul, and you'll also probably never be able to wash your hands clean again. I'm sorry, I don't usually work so blue. It's the lazy man's comedy, although perchance that's fitting for the demon prince of sloth. Belphegor has been depicted in all manner of ways over the years, appearing sometimes as esoteric things like tree branches, or sometimes taking the form of beautiful women. But one wood carving in the 18th century of him sitting on an 18th century John sealed his fate pretty much forever, and then since then, he's almost always been depicted as a horned demon sitting on a throne of sorts. Belphegor, I want to make something clear here. I'm not making fun of you. I'm trying to make sense of all this.
Number 3 on this list is Beelzebub, another demon who is probably one of the most famous religious demons out there. Grunge says, Beelzebub, a demon with roots in old Philistine religions. His name comes up in the Bible a few times in the Gospels of Matthew and Luke, and he may be a stand-in for Satan, but another translation of Beelzebub is Lord of the Flies. John Milton's theory, described in Paradise Lost, is that he's a lieutenant of hell, second in power only to Satan, which is what folks in the industry refer to as resume gold. The starring role of Beelzebub's career is probably his part in the Salem witch trials, in which he was blamed for inhabiting the bodies of the accused. For anyone riding the fence on whether or not there was any real justice to be had there, it's worth looking at the writings of Cotton Mather, a Puritan minister in the area at the time. In his work of Beelzebub and his plot, Mather wrote that there is a devil in a thing doubted by none but such as are under the influences of the devil. If Beelzebub was actually real, then he is responsible for the death of tons of people due to all of the witch stuff that went down. Not to mention just the trials, but what sort of stuff did he actually make these people do? It could be any number of things that we still don't even know about today. For obvious reasons, the church was not too fond of this demon. But it wasn't just the church. Your average everyday individual wasn't too fond of him at all either. Like, think about it. Back in the day, you would have to worry about having Beelzebub come and get you, and then you'd be put on the stake for being a witch if you did. Now obviously, these witch trials were not done even remotely how they should have been, and it's unclear whether or not Beelzebub did or didn't play a role in them. But still, it doesn't change the fact that you would have been worried about him if you were alive back then. Number 2 on this list is Arianism. Arianism wasn't a person necessarily, but a full-on train of thought by many different people that the church was extremely scared of. The Catholic gentleman says, aside from the various Gnostic sects that plagued the early church, it is in Arianism that is arguably the most famous of all Christian heresies. It struck at the very root and core of Christian teaching that Jesus was God himself in the flesh and relegated the person of Jesus Christ to that of a mere created thing. It lives on today in varying forms, from well-known sects like the Jehovah's Witnesses all the way to the bizarre world of Apollo Quiloboy. Moreover, it still lurks within the sentences of some modern theologians who ambiguously state that Jesus is the Christ, but no more than an exalted man. Saint Athanasius of Alexandria was the walking cure for this heresy. Stubborn and unshakable, I think it not a stretch to say at times that this great man stood alone against wave after wave of Arian attacks, attacks on the truth of the Christian faith. By emphasizing and stubbornly holding to the truth of Christ as both God and man, St. Athanasius effectively ended the reign of the Arian heresy within the church. At the root, Arianism is basically the thinking that instead of being born, Jesus was created by God. This obviously goes against a lot of what the church teaches and believes in, and therefore they weren't too fond of this thinking or anyone who thought it. Pretty much anybody back in the day who did wholeheartedly believe this was condemned as being a heretic, and some bad things would be coming down the pipe if that was you. And finally, number 1 on this list is the devil. This one seems obvious, but just because it's obvious doesn't mean that we shouldn't include it on the list. The devil has always been the one to blame for any evil that is plaguing the earth. A great famine takes the lives of thousands of people. The devil did it. Someone loses their minds and kills a bunch of people. They must have been taken over by the devil. My coupon for 20% off on hot wings expired a week ago. Must have been the devil. Obviously, everyone was scared of the devil if he came for them. The church was scared of it, and the average person was scared of it. What is really interesting to me, though, is that the devil, even though he is horribly scary, is actually necessary to religion and the church. Without a devil, the only person to blame for anything bad happening would be God. The guy who's supposed to look out for us all the time would actually be the one doing all of the nasty things that happen to us, as well as all of the good things. Therefore, if we wish to believe that God is good and has our best intentions at heart, we sort of need to have a devil around to take the blame for all this stuff. It's just interesting to think that without the devil, one might be able to argue that we are the most scared of God. Not sure how I feel about that, but a cool thought experiment nonetheless.
Number 5. Slaugh. Our first entry on this list is something called a sloth, which manifests as a bird, predominantly something like a raven or a crow. We all know corvids are the scariest classification of bird there is. It's Celtic in nature, which means almost certainly I am pronouncing that name wrong. It's probably something more like shra. They can take many forms, but prefer to do their hunting while donning the form of a corvid. What do they hunt exactly? Your soul. Your decaying soul, to be precise. These spirits seek out the dying, the weak, and stalk them, waiting like little carrion eaters. Not to worry, they also seek out the living too, waiting for the perfect time to strike. It's said that they seek out those who are experiencing heartbreak or intense emotional pain, so keep yourself in good spirits, I guess, lest ye be attacked by the demon crows. The best way to avoid them, I can't believe this is what it said, but I looked it up, is to keep your windows and doors shut. Because, you know, they are birds. Stay inside and never say their name. Well, I probably should have read that part first, I guess. Sorry. Lore says that these demons were considered so evil and heinous that they were actually banned from hell. Imagine that. I did not even know that was a possibility. I thought hell was kind of where you kept all the most cruel spirits, but I didn't know you could be too hardcore for it. Love the image of Satan looking up at these birds and being like, "Get out! Scat, you!" These creatures come from ancient Irish folklore, where they were first thought to be dark spirits, or just plain old evil entities. But as the years went by, slowly the narrative shifted that these birds were the souls of sinners and damned cast out of hell. In the early 1900s, these creatures were sometimes attributed to mysterious deaths around Europe, predominantly Ireland and Scotland. It was said that when petty criminals and ne'er-do-wells would turn up dead inexplicably, it was the handiwork of these birds. These birds, I got scared to say their name. I don't want to mess with it. I don't want to. I'm just going to keep calling them these birds. These birds wait until your last tender moments on this earth, and when your soul is at its weakest, they swoop in and swallow your soul. What happens to a soul consumed by them? Well, I'm glad you asked. You become part of the flock, doomed to fly with them for the rest of time, feeding on other lost souls. But if spending eternity flying with a bunch of haunted ravens doesn't sound like your deal, I don't blame you. Why not spend eternity with the top 5 scary gang, and click through on the videos and watch forever and ever. Or maybe just an hour here and there. Toss a subscribe too while you're at it. Number 4. Jikininki. If you're familiar with the story of the Wendigo, and no doubt if you're watching Top 5 Scary, you're familiar with the story of the Wendigo because I can't go 3 minutes without shouting about the Wendigo, this spirit is very similar. It's sort of the Japanese Buddhist answer to it. The Jikininki are people who in life were terribly greedy, selfish, and now in death find themselves cursed to forever want more. to never be satisfied, and to also nefariously seek out human bodies to eat to satisfy their dark cravings. Yeah, I'm just gonna slip that one under the door. They stalk in the nighttime, scavenging for freshly deceased bodies and food offerings that have been left out for the dead. It's said that they loot the corpses that they eat too, which I'm gonna be honest, seems remarkably rude. I can understand eating the flesh of a dead body, you know, you're an evil spirit, we all gotta do what we do. But I draw the line at looting. It's a whole other thing entirely to root through their pockets for spare change. Folklore suggests that they use the loot they scavenge off of their victims to bribe city officials to leave them alone to their dark dealings. I knew politicians were corrupt, but I didn't know they took bribes from ghosts. Jinkies, that's a whole new level. It's said that the Jikininki look like decomposing cadavers, with inhuman features like glowing eyes and sharp claws. Interestingly though, some local variants of the tale suggest that they're able to disguise their true nature. They only take this demonic form during the night when they're hunting, and during the daytime, they're able to blend in like any other regular human, perhaps to help them scope out their victims. Should you ever cross a Jikininki, their eyes will be able to give it away, as you'll see the red glow behind their eyes. And when you do, you'll find yourself frozen in fear.
Number 3 on this list is the Pink Lady. In Greencastle, Indiana, there's a massive mansion called the O'Hara Mansion. The pictures in question are by a man named Guy Winters who was investigating said mansion several years ago. This mansion is abandoned and has been for some time, and the locals like to keep it that way. Apparently they have believed for quite some time that some sort of demonic entity lives there and watches over the grounds. It's thought that trespassing on them could endanger your life. This didn't deter Guy Winters and his friend Terry, who wanted to find out for themselves if there really was some sort of evil presence here. They went into the mansion and stayed there for several days and nights with cameras documenting everything. What they found was the Pink Lady, a vaporous pink demon that Guy Winters was able to snap on photograph. Apparently, as is with most of this demon photography, Guy didn't actually see the apparition in real life, but it was only noticed after the picture was developed. This apparition definitely looks like something evil if you ask me. It almost looks like a demon witch, if that's even a thing, but certainly something that has the intention of possessing you or consuming your soul. This picture went along with a bunch of weird occurrences at this place too. Apparently the two boys were perpetually on edge and kept having strange things happen to them. Things would move without them touching them, the temperature in the rooms would change drastically. They both talked about having a voice in their head that they weren't familiar with, something that had them starting to become convinced that they were losing their minds. They might not have known it at the time, but it seems like all of these things can be chalked up to the work of the Pink Lady. Number 2 on this list is the White Lady of Worstead Church. Similarly to our Pink Lady that we mentioned earlier, we have another vaporous demon ghost thing resembling that of a woman. In 1975, Diane and Peter Berthelot visited the Worstead Church in North Norfolk. Peter snapped a pic of his wife praying on one of the church benches. They didn't think anything about the photo at the time, just a cute day at the church, but months later, when they went to go get the film developed, one of their friends saw the photo and asked, "Who's that sitting behind you?" Behind Mrs. Berthelot is what looked to be the apparition of a woman wearing old clothes that were pretty much all white. This was obviously really spooky to the couple since they didn't remember anyone like that sitting behind her when they took the picture. They went back to Worstead Church the next summer and showed it to the Reverend. Apparently, this church for years now has been riddled by the spirit of the White Lady. It's said that this ghost demon is a healer who appears when someone near is in need of healing. When she visited the church at the time of the photo, Diane was in ill health and was taking antibiotics. Now, even though this ghost being is a healer, it can also curse you too. According to one story, on Christmas Eve in 1830, a man boasted a challenge to the White Lady. He said he would climb to the top of the church's belfry and kiss her if she would appear. So up he went. Hours went by and his friends got worried though. They went up to go search for him and they found him in the belfry, cowering in a corner, terrified. "I've seen her," he told them. "I've seen her." And then he died. The demon or ghost or whatever it is clearly capable of totally stunning you out of sheer fright. I personally can't imagine the feeling of literally dying out of fear, but that's what happened here, and it proves that this ghost, if that is what it is, has demonic qualities to it. Now this church has been turned into a pub, believe it or not, but this presence still lingers. I'm all for getting a brew with the lads, but not at the expense of getting totally shell-shocked like that. Number 1 on this list is the Coventry demon. Stephen Wagner writes, on January 22nd, 1985, the Coventry Freeman organization were having a dinner event at St. Mary's Guildhall in Coventry, UK. Everyone in the group had her or his head bowed in prayer when this photo was taken, including a towering mysterious figure standing top left. The strange cowled spectre appears to be wearing clothes much like a monk frock from another time. Lord Mayor Walter Brandish, who was present at the dinner, said that there was no one at the event who was dressed like that, and he could not explain the presence of the interloper in the photo. St. Mary's Guildhall dates back to the 14th century and served as a prison for Mary, Queen of Scots. So as you guys can see, this creature doesn't look like anything human. I know that it resembles something like a monk, as Wagner was saying, but I also think that there's an argument that could be made that it resembles something from the underworld as well. The robes that it's wearing, coupled with the shape of its body, also coupled with the fact that no one actually saw this thing in person at all, kinda leads me to think that there must be something demonic about it. Also, the face doesn't look human at all. It's all black and those eyes don't look like human eyes. I have no idea why a demonic monk-looking creature would show up at this dinner event, but I also don't have any other explanation for why this thing popped up in the photo to begin with. Toss a comment down below if you have any theories on what this thing is or what it could be doing there in the first place. Number 5 on this list is Pelagius. Pelagius lived around 390 AD, and although very little is known about his personal life, we do know that the church was really not happy with his theological teachings. The Catholic gentleman says, Pelagianism radically corrupted the church's teachings on grace, sin, and the fall. Its namesake, the British monk Pelagius, taught that the sin of Adam had no bearing on subsequent generations. Essentially, man was inherently good and unaffected by the fall. In practice, this meant that a man could come to God by his own free will with no grace needed. Many saints fought against this doctrine. Saint David of Wales stands out among them especially, but it was Saint Augustine of Hippo, arguably the greatest of the Latin doctors, and the church's mightiest champion against heresy, who rose to fight against this inherently venomous strand of thought. Against Pelagius, Saint Augustine upheld the truth that God's grace is entirely necessary for any movement of ours towards God to occur at all. As he himself puts it, we, for our part, assert that the human will is so divinely aided towards the doing of righteousness that, besides being created with the free choice of his will, and besides the teaching which instructs him how he ought to live, he receives also the Holy Spirit, through which there arises in his heart a delight in and love of that supreme and unchangeable good which is God. And this arises even now, while he still walks by faith and not by sight. Everything about Pelagius's teachings went against what the church wanted. They wanted and believed that people needed to be committed to God through them, but what this man was teaching was kind of going against that. This scared the church a lot because it was undermining their power to act as the medium for the average human being and God. Therefore, Pelagius had to be stopped. There's no record of him being executed, but we do know that at one point he had to flee Rome and go into hiding to continue his work. Number 4 on this list is Asmodeus. Asmodeus is actually a demon, and whether or not he is real can definitely be debated. But what can't be debated is how scared the church was of him. Grunge says the demon known as Asmodeus appears in the book of Tobit, a Judeo-Christian book of the Bible that's either religious canon or apocrypha depending on which branch of Christianity you subscribe to. Asmodeus is said to be the worst of the demons. He doesn't hesitate to kill, and he has what has to be the lamest, most specific Achilles heel in the history of monsters. In the book of Tobit, there's a young woman named Sarah who would very much like to be married. She becomes engaged, gets married, and then right before the sweet consummating, Asmodeus shows up and kills her husband. What might seem like a fluke quickly becomes a trend, as this happens to Sarah a total of 7 times. On lucky number 8, Sarah, who must have been an amazing conversationalist for this many guys to roll these dice, marries a guy named Tobias, who the Archangel Raphael gives the scoop on how to beat Asmodeus. The demon appears on the wedding night, and Tobias tosses a fish's heart and liver onto some coals, causing smoke that triggers Asmodeus' asthma or something like that. Asmodeus scampers off, and Raphael tracks him down, ties him up, and strangles him. So luckily for us, the text says that there's no more of Asmodeus, but that doesn't mean that his evil spirit doesn't still linger on. This is a demon that we're talking about here, and one of the worst ones ever at that. So I wouldn't be surprised if getting rid of this guy for good is a pretty hard thing to accomplish. Also, just a sidebar here, but poor Sarah, eh? This lady's just trying to get married and literally has to do it 8 separate times before one finally sticks. I think after marriage number 3, I'd personally just call it quits and get a puppy or something. Number 3 on this list is the Most Holy Trinity Church. Here we have another Catholic church that's meant for worship, but has been riddled by a haunting. World on Fire says there are a few possible origins of the hauntings that supposedly plague this old parish. One claims that the current church building, built from 1882 to 1885, stands over an old cemetery where some bodies are still buried. Supposedly the ghosts of the folk under the church haunt the building and mysteriously turn lights on and off, open and close doors, and walk back and forth. Or it could just be living people doing those things, since those activities, believe it or not, are not limited to ghosts. The living can also open doors and turn on lights. At least they could last time I checked. Or maybe I'm a ghost and I don't even know it. Anyways, another source of the ghost legend is that one of the first pastors of the church, Monsignor Michael May, passed away in his bedroom and continues to haunt the church grounds. Apparently, visitors hear mysterious steps at all hours of the night, and dogs have been known to stare as if in a trance at the stairs and dining room of the rectory. In all honesty, dogs staring at things, definitely not indisputable ghostly evidence. I mean, I've seen dogs do some weird stuff before, so I don't think that we can prove anything beyond a reasonable doubt based on their activities. However, it is very important to note nonetheless, whenever a big storm is coming, watch what your animals do. I bet that they'll go and hide or act differently right before a massive thunderstorm or a tornado or something. Us humans, we don't even notice it, we don't sense it at all, but they definitely will. This sort of weird sense, it also translates to ghosts as well, so maybe the dog really is seeing something from the afterlife at this church. Number 2 on this list is Anneliese Michel. This is a very sad story where there may not ever have been any ghosts involved, but they sure thought that there was. Wikipedia says, when Michel was 16, she experienced a seizure and was diagnosed with psychosis caused by temporal lobe epilepsy. Shortly thereafter, she was diagnosed with depression and was treated by a psychiatric hospital. By the time she was 20, she had become intolerant of various religious objects and began to hear voices. Her condition worsened despite medication, and she became suicidal, also displaying other symptoms for which she took medication as well. After the taking of psychiatric medications for 5 years failed to improve her symptoms, Michel and her family became convinced that she was possessed by a demon. As a result, her family appealed to the Catholic Church for an exorcism. While rejected at first, true priests got permission from the local bishop in 1975. The priests began conducting exorcism sessions, and the parents stopped consulting doctors. Anneliese Michel stopped eating food and died of malnourishment and dehydration after 67 exorcism sessions. Michel's parents and the 2 Roman Catholic priests were found guilty of negligent homicide and were sentenced to 6 months in jail as well as a fine. This might not be the most terrifying of all of the ghost stories on here, considering the only real ghost involved was the fear that everybody had to begin with. Poor Anneliese would have went through absolute agony in her final days when there probably wasn't any paranormal activity to even begin with. And finally, number 1 on this list is St. Rita's Church. Several decades ago, there was one heck of a ghostly interaction that went down at this church. World on Fire says, on All Souls Day in the early 1960s, St. Rita's Parish had a ghostly visitation. More than a dozen parishioners had gathered there to pray when sometime in the early evening the organ began to play by itself. Suddenly, 6 robed monks appeared, 3 wearing black and 3 wearing white. The parishioners attempted to flee, but they found the doors of the church were locked. The phantom monks moved towards the parishioners while the organ continued its dirge. Finally, the vision faded as a disembodied voice whispered, "Pray for us." So next time you see a ghost, it probably just wants to ask you a favor and hopefully not kill you. All they were asking for was a little prayer, which I think everyone would have been more than happy to indulge with at that time. Of course, having a bunch of ghost monks show up out of nowhere, lock all of the doors, and keep you in there, that's pretty terrifying. Everyone is still very wary around St. Rita's Church in case these monks ever do come back. Number 5 on this list is St. Mary's Catholic Church. This is a Catholic church in Nashville, Tennessee that is apparently deeply haunted. World on Fire says there are 3 ghosts rumored to haunt this church and its grounds. One story holds that a priest died during construction of the church. Another story claims that during the Civil War, a Catholic priest serving as a chaplain for the Confederate Army was shot and killed in the church. There's another rumor that the ghost is the spirit of Bishop Richard Pius Miles, the first bishop of Diocese of Nashville, who died in 1860. He was buried in the church basement and supposedly still haunts his old stomping grounds. According to one story from 1937, a pounding at his bedroom door woke up a priest in the rectory, but he could find no one there. After he fell asleep, he was woken up again, this time by a pounding on the headboard of his bed. There was no one in his room, so the awakening was attributed to supernatural causes by superstitious locals. I can't say that I personally would substitute a ghost pounding on my headboard's wake-up call for a regular alarm clock, but hey, whatever gets you out of bed in the morning, right? Nowadays, the 3 ghosts that wander around here are sort of just part of the church and accepted among those who pray and worship here. Apparently these ghosts are relatively calm and won't cause too much trouble other than the occasional midnight stomping, that is. There was, however, one story where the chaplain for the Confederate Army ghost attacked someone. It happened over 50 years ago now, but apparently a woman and her young son were walking past the church and got bombarded by this ghost. They both managed to get out okay, but they were obviously really shaken up. Now, nobody knows why this ghost did this or what the story was, but we think that this woman and her son were descendants of someone who had dealings with him in real life. Potentially their grandfather killed this man or something along those lines. It's all a bit hazy, but the good thing is that's the only group of people his ghost has ever chosen to attack before. Other than that, these ghosts are just relatively annoying, but they shouldn't cause you too much problems if you go here. Number 4 on this list is the widow. There was a widow who lived in the 20th century who was a very devout Catholic. For some reason, this woman, who we're gonna call Ruth, had a very strong connection to the spirits that were in purgatory. Her story goes like this. The first soul Ruth encountered was her departed husband. He had often been impatient during his bout with cancer and had reproached God. One evening, Ruth heard a voice. That happened almost every evening over a long time when she came in from the stable. Then she suddenly recognizes the voice of her husband, but she isn't quite sure yet. Then she kneels down and just prays the rosary. She recommends her husband in particular. Yes, she thinks, he was often rather impatient. Is that perhaps the reason he must still do penance? A few evenings later, she sees a nebulous apparition right in the middle of the room. She takes holy water and prays, "O Lord, give him eternal rest." It makes her very upset, and then she sees her husband. He speaks quietly. "Don't be afraid, Ruth, it's me. I may come here to ask your help. Pray 3 chaplets each day." And then he was gone. So every day she prays 3 chaplets. Each time she adds, "Good God, forgive my husband his impatience when he suffered." After some weeks, her husband stands again in the middle of the room. He looks well. He's friendly and beautiful. She recalls how he was a young man. He says nothing. He only looks at her so grateful and full of love. Then she asks him, "How are you, Jacob?" He answers clearly and quietly, "I'm fine. I may come soon. I thank you, Ruth. I thank you so much." and after this he never appeared again. So that's a pretty famous story, and Ruth went on to interact with many ghosts like this in purgatory through her life. In fact, some people started to speculate that she may even be a ghost herself as well. Number 3 on this list is the couple's demon. William Hope was a paranormal investigator who lived from 1863 to 1933. During that time, he was responsible for capturing a wide array of spiritual photographs which showcase ghosts and demons. Now, after evaluating some of his work, I think it's fair to assume that some of it is doctored. I'm not sure how one man would have been able to capture all the demonic pictures that he did without potentially faking a few. That being said though, I don't think that everything he's done has been doctored, and I imagine that there are some with serious legitimacy to them. One of his most famous is of an older couple with what clearly looks to be a demon standing behind them. When they took this photo, nobody was physically there, and they could only capture this devilish creature when they looked at the film after the fact. Some other entries on this list, I mean, you might be able to classify as a ghost, but this is 100% a demon. The eyes are black and unforgiving, and it looks as if you're getting sucked into a black hole of nothingness. You can't make out this creature's lower body at all, and she's just all black. She reminds me a lot of a few urban legends of female demons appearing around the world. Their stories differ, but there are some commonalities between them all. Usually a woman appears like this to a stranger, asks them a few questions, and if they don't answer properly, will drag them to hell. I'm actually surprised that the people in this photograph managed to get out of it safely without feeling her presence or being attacked while they were there. I'm pretty sure that the church can explain this one, they just probably won't like the explanation very much. Number 2 on this list is the lady in the lift. Whenever you step into an elevator, it feels as if you've stepped into a portal of some kind. If you really think about it, it kind of is a portal, considering you start on one floor and then finish on a different one. Now obviously there isn't anything magical about said elevators, and this portal of sorts is really just a mechanical innovation that takes you up and down tall buildings. That being said, this non-paranormal portal definition might not apply to the elevator in this photo. As we can see, there are a few people hanging out and chatting by the elevators. This was a picture captured by a doctor in a hospital in Bolivia. The elevator in the right of the image decided to open all by itself though. The group didn't think anything of it at the time, but when they looked back, noticed something fairly unsettling. The apparition of a woman is clearly standing in the elevator, staring right at them. No one knows who this woman is, but it's clear that she's either a ghost or a demon. Elevators have always seemed to have a connection to ghostly apparitions for whatever reason. Maybe it's because they do give off the sensation of being a portal, but there are a lot of stories connected to elevators and hauntings. This photo actually reminds me a lot of a haunted place in Austria. A young girl was at a university residence during Christmas. She was pretty much the only one who stayed there and didn't go home for the holidays. While she was there by herself, she accidentally stepped into the elevator shaft and fell to her death. Now she's set to haunt that elevator and torment those who step inside. Maybe this photo is of a similar story, but just at the hospital. It's impossible to say for sure, but either way guys, I'd be taking the stairs. And finally, number 1 on this list is the little boy. This photo is extremely scary and just flat out disturbing. BuzzFeed writes, the Reddit user who posted this image was deeply skeptical that there was anything paranormal going on, although they couldn't deny there is something chilling about the figure of a little boy staring out from the ruins of an old school. I grew up in a small rural town in between mountains. A couple years ago they were tearing down an old elementary school. A guy my mom knew went in and took pics with his cell phone. When he uploaded them, this was one of the pics. I don't believe in stuff like this at all. I just really don't know how to explain it since it was a cell phone pic, and I'm pretty sure that no one in my podunk hometown knows how to make fake pics. So maybe he doesn't know how, but I know how to explain it. You're in the ruins of an old school, and those ruins are haunted by the demon of a young boy. Sometimes the simplest answers are the right ones, and this to me looks like an example of that. This little dude 100% looks possessed, and you can't even really make out his legs. Nor can you actually see his arms either for that matter. Kind of difficult to make up a logical explanation for a kid with no arms and no legs floating in the middle of an abandoned school. Also, side note, but can you imagine being the one to take this picture? Like you turn a corner and you see that dude and your first thought is, I'm gonna pull out my phone and take a picture of this kid. Like if that's me, I am straight up running out of that thing and we're burning that building hot.